Imagine this. Yellow sage grass crunches underneath Peter's bare feet. He and Jesus walk towards a cluster of palm trees. If it weren't for those palm trees, you might think you were at Lake Norris. The Sea of Galilee is a giant lake surrounded by mountains. The gentle morning waves sweep across the rocky shore. The smell of charcoal fire crisping up fresh mackerel drifts through the air. Today is the third time that Jesus has appeared to the disciples since his death. He asked Peter a question. Actually, 3 questions. Simon Peter, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord. You know that I love you. Jesus says, feed my lambs. Jesus asks again, do you love me? Peter says, yes, you know that I love you. Jesus replies again, tend my sheep. A third time, Jesus asks, do you love me? And Peter replies, yes, you know all things. You know I love you. Jesus says, feed my sheep. Think about that. A few weeks ago, Peter watched this man, his hero, his teacher, his rabbi, die a gruesome death on the cross. And then on top of that, Peter denied even knowing his best friend. Now they're eating fish on the western coast of the sea, back where it all began. And what is Jesus telling Peter? He says, hey, if you love me, you say that you love me, I want you to love people. When I used to read that story, I just thought, I get it. Jesus is telling Peter to feed his lambs, tend his sheep, feed my sheep. Yeah, that makes sense. But Jesus is telling Peter to be a good pastor. You know, feed your lambs, teach people about me, preach good sermons, take care of the people in your church. But then I started to think about it. Who are the sheep? Doesn't Jesus talk about sheep somewhere else? Oh yeah, Jesus says we are to leave the 99 and go after the one. Oh, maybe everyone are sheep. Maybe we are Peter. Or how about if I say it this way? I think we are more comfortable to love people my way, aren't we? You know what I mean, right? Like my way, our own way, we pick the people and how to do it. But the real question is, are we loving people Jesus' way? When Jesus told Peter to love people, he wasn't telling Peter a theory of interpersonal relationships. He was telling Peter about his life. The life we have recorded by 4 different eyewitnesses. Matthew, the tax collector, Peter's roadie Mark, Luke, the physician, and John, the apostle. They all recorded ways that Jesus modeled what he taught. I want to share with you 3 things that are really special when it comes to loving people like Jesus did. Jesus saw people differently. Jesus put others first. And Jesus loved people in community. Jesus saw people differently. The writers of the Gospels recorded lots of stories of Jesus showing radical and surprising love to people. Think about it. How many stories and examples of Jesus loving people in radically surprising ways do we have? In Luke 22, the physician records the story of Jesus and a Samaritan woman at the well. In Jesus' time, women went to the well together to gather water, but she's alone. And she is going at the hottest time of the day. She is full of shame, but Jesus sees the best in her. He knows she has a bit of a shady past, but instead, he reveals to her, I am the Messiah. And he offers her living water. Or what about the Roman centurion who Matthew the tax collector writes about? He was a Roman, basically a sergeant in the army that was using their force to occupy Jesus' homeland. This was a guy who Jesus should have had no love, no compassion for, but instead, Matthew 8:5, Jesus is moved by the faith of this man and heals one of his servants with just a phrase, God, let it be done for you as you have believed. Zacchaeus, the chief tax collector who was rich. I kind of imagine him like Scrooge McDuck and just this mountain of gold coins that he just jumps right into. When Jesus sees him, surely a man who has been taking advantage of people, stealing their inheritance and their income and their money for food, Jesus instead says to Zacchaeus, I want to go to dinner with you at your house today. Those three people, a Samaritan woman living an immoral life, a Roman centurion with a completely different faith background, and Zacchaeus, someone who is living for money and not for God. Those three people make me wonder, am I loving people like Jesus? Are you? Do you feel compassion for people who aren't following God and are doing immoral things? Do you see God-given value in every person, no matter what they're living like? Do you ever spend time around people with different faith and different morals than you? Do you ever go to their house to eat? Those are the things that Jesus did. He was different. Jesus connected with people. He loved them. When we see people through God's lenses, we see miracles, not mistakes. When we see people like Jesus, we see what could be. We believe the best in others. Speaking of seeing the best in people, Jesus said something pretty tough. You know what's coming, don't you? Matthew 5. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Okay, Jesus, those are some seriously high expectations. He says, don't just love your family and the people who are nice to you, you have to love your enemies too. Maybe you're thinking, what? Jesus, I'm pretty sure the definition of enemy is people I don't love. Okay, I don't know if you can tell through this video, but I'm a very happy person. I am 7 on the Enneagram and a yellow temperament. So, in other words, everyone is my friend. So, I don't think I have any enemies. Okay, maybe that one guy who cut me off on I-40 last week, but besides him. But even if I don't have enemies, I do know some EGRs, extra grace required. But you know what Paul says about those people. In 1 Corinthians 13:5, he says, hey you, Holly, all of you listening, love doesn't insist on its own way. We put others first. If we are loving people, we will put their needs above our own. I have more bad news. Don't hate me, please. So remember I said I don't have any enemies, just EGRs? Well, I have a letter from someone who had a lot of enemies. Remember that guy from the beginning? You know, the fish breakfast with resurrected Jesus, Peter. So a couple of decades after the Feed My Sheep talk, Peter is now planting Christian campuses all over the place around Israel. And he wrote a sermon that was so powerful, it was turned into a letter sent all around to the house churches or groups. That letter is 1 Peter. I'm going to read you a couple of verses, but first, do you know what was happening at the time Peter wrote that letter? The early Christians were not the most popular bunch. There was a division with the Jewish church, and now the Christians were subject to social scorn, shame, slander, and stigma. And on top of that, Christians were just beginning to experience real persecution from the Roman government. So maybe it's the mama bear in me, but I want to be like, no sir, those people are not taking advantage of our niceness. They're taking our money. They won't let us go to church. Their political agenda is so opposite of Christianity. Surely Jesus would not want me to love them, right? Peter knew that hate, division, and discord was not how Jesus wanted his followers to love. Here is just a couple of things Peter wrote to those early Christians. In 1 Peter 3:8-9, finally, all of you have unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, a tender heart, and a humble mind. Do not repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling. But on the contrary, bless. For to this you were called, and that you may obtain a blessing. When we put other people first, and we love people in a radical and surprising way, different than the world, it makes people see that there is something different about those Christians. Thankfully though, Jesus doesn't ask us to do this alone. We don't love people alone, we love people in community. We love people in groups. From the very beginning of the Jesus movement, there was a group, 12 disciples. And from the very beginning of the church, there were groups. Don't believe me? Check out Acts 2:42. That is a group. They prayed, they ate, they talked, they read the Bible. Actually, you know what? Most of the New Testament letters, Galatians, Philippians, Hebrews, were first written by apostles to house churches of 15 to about 50 people. So basically, groups are how Christians have been loving people and growing from the start. But how do groups work? We do 3 things in groups: connect, protect, and grow. One of my favorite illustrations of group is in Luke 15:11. Jesus tells a story that is famous, the prodigal son. We learn this son is proud, he's a little bit of a jerk. He takes his father's inheritance and goes to the ancient equivalent of Vegas and blows his inheritance. The son ends up broke and hungry and working on a pig farm. When he is face down in the muck, he has a revelation. I'm going home. The son returns home, the father runs out and hugs him and receives him. So beautiful. A little snapshot of God pursuing us. But I want to show you something interesting. Maybe you've never noticed this before. In Luke 15:22, after the son repents and the father hugs the son, the father calls out to his servants, "Quickly, bring the best robe, put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet." Do you see what happened there? The father receives the son. He embraces him. He welcomes him just like that, just like our God receives us. He redeems us. But then, the servants, the community, the group, bring the robe, bring the shoes, bring the ring. The father calls the community to equip the son. The community brought the son a robe, a ring, and shoes. And in a group, our marching orders are to connect, protect, and grow. When I think about the ring, it's symbolic. It symbolizes union. It represents a relationship. Think of the ring as connect. And the robe, it protects you from the cold. It protects you from the rain. Just like in groups where we protect through prayer, a spiritual covering, asking God to protect our people. And finally, the community brought shoes. Those shoes, what do? Help us take steps. Taking steps with Jesus is how we define growth. The Father receives, the community runs, pursues the prodigal son. God calls out to us, bring the ring, connect. Bring the robe, protect. Bring the shoes, grow. We want you to win your world, and loving people is a vital part of that. We love people by seeing them like God sees them. We love people by putting others first, and we love people in community. This week, in your group, you're going to talk more about loving people, but I hope it isn't just something you talk about. I hope you find ways in your own life this week to love people like Jesus.